"I have paid that visit to the Eskdales, Mr. Douglas," said Mrs. Douglas in a tone of triumphant sourness. "You don't say so, my dear. I hope you left my card." "Not I, Mr. Douglas. How could I? They let me in, which was too unkind. I saw the whole family, father and mother, brother and sisters, the future bride and bridegroom. Such a tribe, and servants without end. How I detest walking up that great flight of steps at Eskdale Castle, with that regiment of footmen drawn up on each side of it, one looking more impertinent than the other." "There must be a frightful accumulation of impertinence before you reach the landing-place, my dear, for it is a long staircase." "Don't talk nonsense, Mr. Douglas," said his wife sharply. "I shan't go again in a hurry. The whole house is hateful to me. Lady Eskdale, with her dawdling, languid manner, and her large shawl, and conceited cap, and that Lord Beaufort, with his black eyebrows and shining teeth. Lady Eskdale looked as old as the hills, with all that lace hanging about her face. She has grown excessively old, Mr. Douglas. I never saw anybody so altered." "Did you think so, Anne? I thought her looking very handsome yesterday when I met her in her pony carriage." "Ah, that pony carriage! That is so like her nonsense. Pony carriages are the fashion, and she has taken to drive. I should not be the least surprised any day to hear that she had broken her neck. Why cannot she go out in her britska and be driven by her coachman? And as for looking handsome, it is not very likely that she should at her age. Lady Eskdale is as old as I am, Mr. Douglas." "You don't say so," was again on the point of escaping Mr. Douglas's lips, and after a pause he bethought himself of the lovers as a safer topic than Lady Eskdale's beauty. He had tried that too often in his life. "Did you see Helen, my dear?" "Oh, to be sure. She was sent for. Dear love, as Lady Eskdale drawled out. She is so happy, and you must see Teviot. He is such a darling. If he were my own son, I could not love him more." So in they came, the dear love and the darling. You know how I hate those London sort of men, with their mustachios and chains and offensive waistcoats, and Lord Teviot is one of the worst specimens I ever saw of the kind. "And Helen?" again said Mr. Douglas. "Oh, Helen," said Mrs. Douglas, and then paused. She was in imminent peril of being forced to praise, but escaped with great adroitness. "Well, if Helen were not one of that family, I should not dislike her. She is civil enough, and promised to show the girls her trousseau. But she is altered too. I think her looking dreadfully old, Mr. Douglas." "Old at 18, Anne? And what wrinkled wretches we must be! Has Helen grown grey?" "No, but you know what I mean. She looks so set up, so fashioned. In short, it does not signify, but she is altered." Mr. Douglas had his suspicions that Helen must have been looking beautiful, since even his wife could not detect, or at least specify, the faults that were to be found in her appearance. He had seldom seen her so much at fault for a criticism. Mrs. Douglas had never had the slightest pretensions to good looks. In fact, though it is wrong to say anything so ill-natured, she was excessively plain, always had been so, and had a soreness on the subject of beauty that looked perhaps as like envy as any other quality. As she had no hope of raising herself to the rank of a beauty, her only chance was bringing others down to her own level. "How old she is looking! How she is altered!" were the expressions that invariably concluded Mrs. Douglas's comments on her acquaintances, and the prolonged absence of a friend was almost a pleasure to her, as it gave her the opportunity of saying after a first meeting, "How changed Mrs. So-and-so is! I should hardly have known her, but then, to be sure, I have not seen her for a year, or 2 years," etc. People may go on talking forever of the jealousies of pretty women, but for real, genuine, hard-working envy, There is nothing like an ugly woman with a taste for admiration. Her mortified vanity curdles into malevolence, and she calumniates where she cannot rival. Mrs. Douglas had been an heiress, which perhaps accounted for Mr. Douglas having married her, but though no one could suppose that he married for love, he had been to her what is called a good husband. He let her have a reasonable share of her own way, and spend a reasonable portion of her own money. He abstained from all vivid admiration of beauty within her hearing. He had a great reliance on her judgment, and a high opinion of her talents, and though he was too good-hearted to hear without pain her sarcasms on almost all her acquaintance, he seldom irritated her by contradiction, but kept his own opinion with a quiet regret that his wife was so hard to please. The Eskdales and Douglases had been near neighbours for many years, and had always been on sociable and sometimes intimate terms. Mrs. Douglas could almost have become attached to her neighbour, had it not been for the prolonged youthfulness of Lady Eskdale's appearance, and the uninterrupted and increasing prosperity of her family. The provocation grew too great for endurance. The ladies had become mothers at the same time, and the comparison of their babies, monthly nurses, and embroidered caps had been the commencement of their intimacy. Then came the engagement of nursery governesses, and discussions on the comparative merits of Swiss bonnes, highly accomplished French governesses, poor clergymen daughters, or respectable young ignorant women. Then the respective right shoulders of Sophia Beaufort and Sarah Douglas took a fit of growing, without due regard to the stationary dispositions of the left. There are 2 years in every woman's life in which the undue size of her right shoulder is the bane of her own life and of everybody about her. Mrs. Douglas called constantly at Eskdale Castle to satisfy her that Sophia was growing absolutely deformed, and Lady Eskdale owned she should fret dreadfully about her poor darling if she did not think Mrs. Douglas so much more to be pitied on her dear Sarah's account. The girls grew up perfectly straight, of course. This period of reclining boards and dumbbells was the most flourishing age of the Eskdale and Douglas friendship.